Hey folks, it's Sam, and I'm doing this update here about President Trump and his health. Obviously, this has been quite a shocking development over the last day now. This time yesterday, I'm recording this on October 2nd, Friday, October 2nd at about 5:15 p.m. This time yesterday, we didn't realize that Trump's assistant, Hope Hicks, had tested positive for COVID. Trump went to campaign events and other things, even though he knew that she had tested positive for COVID, perhaps spread it to others or whatever. Last night, when it was reported, I think it was Bloomberg News reported that Hope Hicks tested positive for COVID. Then Trump got tested, Trump and Melania, and he came back with a positive um, result. And so I'm going to be looking at Trump's dashas here and looking at the I'm doing a case study on how serious this is going to be. And I'm here, as you see, we have Trump's chart here, and these are the transits right now. Okay, this is where the planets are right now. And by the way, this is the chart of the announcement when it happened. I did this last night. And this was the moment that the announcement came. So I just did a video on that as well that you can watch. This one is just going to be, I'm going to look at his dashas actually in great detail. And this, we're just going to look at this chart, the dashas, and then the transits are over here. This is the chart of the moment right now, and this is his chart. In particular, what I want to look at, of course, is I want to look at his dashas, and especially the third level down. I've already done a couple recent videos about Trump and his chart because of the upcoming election, and I've done several. And one, I looked at the charts of him and Biden and Pence and Kamala Harris. So I have a video on my YouTube channel where I did that. I also have another one where I just looked at Trump's chart, and it was something to the effect of, why does he keep winning even while he's losing? And I went back and looked at, and I basically evaluated his what's called Viparit Raja Yoga, which is his sixth house ruler in the 12th house. And even since he started his Jupiter-Saturn dasha at the beginning of 2019, again, since the beginning of 2019, in fact, even I think this exact day, January 3rd, this was when Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House, and that whole new wave, the Democrats took over the House, and it's been struggle and fight since then. He got impeached, all this other stuff that happened. The Mueller report came out. Since January of 2019, it's been very hard. He's had extremely hard time because Jupiter-Saturn is a vicious cycle for him as a Leo, really hard. Not to mention the transits are also very difficult right now. And by the way, the reason Jupiter and Saturn is so hard is Jupiter rules the 8th house for Leo. Again, when you're doing Vedic astrology, you have to look at the planets as fully developed. It's not just, well, Jupiter's one of the good ones, Saturn's one of the bad ones, good, bad. No. Every planet has a nuanced nature based on its rulerships, primarily, and its nature. So Jupiter is not only Jupiter, which is about leadership and inspiration and purpose. It's a powerful planet for a Leo, but it's also the 8th house ruler. And the 8th house is the house of death, of change, of transformation. It's a planet, it's also a planet, the 8th house ruler, of consequences. You might say karma, but karma is a big thing, but it's the difficulty. It's a lot of the karma that comes back to us. So is the 12th house. But 8th house is definitely a lot of it's about deception and the deception coming back to us and the scales getting leveled. Very deep, a lot of deep karmic implications where we think we get away with something. We might get away with it now. Again, the 8th and the 12th houses. We might get away with it now, let's say like lying or cheating or stealing. Those are mainly 12th house, but we often get the karma comes back to us in something that maybe feels unfair, or suddenly something happens. Suddenly someone left me. Well, it's only shocking and sudden because we've been unconscious about it and maybe getting away with things. But eighth house shocks us into reality. So it's very much a house of karma in that regard. So we might think, hey, I never pay the consequences for anything. I get away with things all the time. And then the eighth house lord runs and we're shocked into reality. Right? So he started that right after he became elected, right after the election. This is right after election day 2016. He started Jupiter Dasha. Then he went into Jupiter Saturn early 2019, and that's the Dasha that he's in now. In addition, Saturn in the sky, let me make it bigger here. In addition, Saturn in the sky right now is going through his sixth house. This is his chart. You count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Saturn is going through his sixth house, and it rules the sixth house. The sixth house is the house of enemies, of struggles, of problems, of the where it's necessary to do service and to be of service to something higher. And so this Saturn, he's in Jupiter Saturn, but one of the main things with Saturn is with the sixth house ruler, which is what Saturn is for Leo, is again, it brings out our enemies. Now he's again very good at defeating his enemies. He's a master at it, even when he's wrong. He can defeat his enemies in many ways. He winds up getting weak enemies. He gets other people to fight his enemies. He gets luck on his side somehow, and his enemies get undermined. And again, I advise you to watch a video that I did on my YouTube channel that says something. It says, why does Trump keep winning even as he's losing? Which means even though he gets impeached and what he did was much worse than, for example, like what happened with Nixon and whatever, and it was corroborated and obstructing justice and all this, he didn't get removed from office because he had powerful allies help him. His opponents are very weak. Again, he gets very weak opponents, etc., etc. So I did a whole thing on that. And I was doing it in preparation for what could happen in this election. Is he's in this cycle now. He's in Jupiter Saturn going into the election. And even though he's very much behind, he's very far behind in all the polling. He's so far behind that he's never been close to being ahead. This is why I think it's pretty clear that he's been trying to undermine the integrity of the election and all that stuff, because he might win even though he loses. Again, that's the context of what I'm saying. Even in 2016, he became president even though he lost, as far as 3 million more people voted for his opponent. So again, this is something that he's very good at. It's a compliment. So those of you who don't like me saying bad things about Trump, it's a compliment, okay? This is how he winds up winning and actually defeating his enemies, is because the sixth house ruler is in the 12th house in his chart, okay? So again, Saturn, the sixth house ruler, in his chart is in the 12th house. So his enemies disappear. His enemies are confused. He knows how to confuse his enemies with a barrage of ideas that they just can't keep up with, and blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to be answering questions in this. It's open to chat. You all can chat. I'm just going to do this. I'm not answering questions or looking at the chat, just to let you know. I already see questions. Is he going to lose the election? What about Trump's Pence's chart? I'm not answering questions. I'm just going to put this out, okay? Maybe I'll come back later and do it. It's just too much to keep in my head, okay? So anyway, but this is why he winds up winning, even though he loses. Even though he lost 2016, he's president. So that was what I was evaluating, that even though he's so far behind, he's trying to, again, 6th house is all, and 12th house is also stealing and theft and all kinds of things like that, right? And it's a very powerful skill that he has. So this is the dasha, and I want to just give context of what's happening now. This is 2 levels. Again, this is since January 2019, but to look at the election, I break it out into 3 levels on the tertiary level. So the election actually happens in Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu. You see he goes into Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu on October 27th, right? Right before the election, he goes into Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu. Rahu is a very powerful planet for him. Rahu is the planet of of deception and trickery and stealing and all that kind of stuff. And again, he's got a very powerful Rahu in his natal chart. He's like an embodiment of Rahu. He's like an embodiment of Rahu almost as much as I am. Kidding. And because you can see Rahu has eclipsed his sun. It's right on his sun in the 10th house. It's very powerful. He comes in and he just eclipses everything. He like eclipses the other person with this smoke, with this illusion of information and all this other stuff. So Rahu is very powerful for him. And around election day, Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu could be very powerful. But he's not in that yet. He's now in Jupiter, Saturn, Mars. And he's gotten very sick. And this is serious business. I did a quick update yesterday, last night, when this started, because first of all, it was just a very powerful muhurta. Like as soon as it happened, I looked at it. I happened to be watching, and again, I just did a video yesterday about it that you can see, which is Trump COVID announcement. And I talked about quite a few things, including things about the elections. You can go back and watch that too if you're interested about how this is going to affect the election. I'll say a few things about it here. But in particular, when I started looking at this, I was like, man, this is a serious transit. But I wasn't even really looking at his dashas. I wasn't even looking at the third level. I was just looking at Jupiter-Saturn dasha and then the transits that started or that triggered this. So here I'm going to look in more depth, okay? And so, again, Jupiter-Saturn, first of all, it's the 8th house ruler, Jupiter. It's the 6th house ruler, Saturn, where the 6th house is also our enemies, but also having to fight and health problems, and where we get our energy drained, and where we're having to, go through a fight. And again, that's why since January of last year, he's been in a big fight. It's been one fight after the next. It was, Nancy Pelosi took over the Senate or the House, and it's just been fights and not getting impeached. And again, people have to understand something. As much as you might have this idea, he just keeps winning, and this is very hard. I don't care what anybody says. No president wants to be descended upon by their enemies like that. He wants to get in there and do what he wants to do. And the fact that all these people are trying to impeach him and call him out and investigate him, to him is furious. It's absolutely been furious for the last year. This is why, you saw it at that debate the other night. He's just like almost blinded by his rage about all his enemies and stuff like that. Because he's been in Jupiter-Saturn dasha. Whoops, I got to put this back to Vimshotri. Because he's been in Jupiter-Saturn since early 2019, and he's just been furious. So now it's Jupiter-Saturn-Mars. 8th Lord, 6th Lord, and then also Mars. And the biggest thing with Mars, when I went back and just really looked again, is everything that Mars rules. Now, he won the presidency in Rahu Mars. That was the dasha. But that was Rahu Mahadasha. That's how powerful Rahu is. It made him president. And Mars is the Raja Yoga Karaka planet for him, which makes him strong. So it's easy to say, okay, well, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars makes him strong. Okay, but Mars, what you have to look at really when you do Vedic astrology, at least the way I do it, very precisely, and ways that I've been able to predict dashas and karmas unfolding very accurately for years and years. My students will attest to this, is you have to look at what the planets rule. And you have to look at what Mars rules here as well. And in particular, Mars is the ruler, and you have to look at nakshatras and signs, nakshatras and rashis, okay? Mars is the ruler of this, let me make this bigger. Mars is the ruler of this Ketu moon in his 4th house because it's Scorpio. So Mars is the ruler of Scorpio. So Mars is activating this Ketu moon in his 4th house, and look at the transit chart. Ketu is now right on that moon, Ketu, in his 4th house. And make no mistake, this is a vicious transit. This is a very hard transit for health. You do not want to see Ketu returning over his natal moon in the 4th house. The 4th house body part is the lungs. This is the 4th house body part. It's the lungs. Fourth house body part is the lungs. And this shows a high capacity that he's going to have potential lung problems with this transit. And Ketu is right on the moon. And in fact, I'm going to run this transit. Just watch the exact degrees of Ketu. His moon is 2805. Ketu right now is 2832, and I'll run it by day. This is today. This is Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Between like now and next Tuesday, man, Ketu is like exactly on this debilitated moon in the fourth house. So it's not just that Ketu is going through the fourth house and going over his natal Ketu, it's going over his debilitated moon in the fourth house. So it's a very clear statement in Parashara. And again, this is where it comes into play. Now, my students that listen to me know that when you see these kinds of rules, you don't take them literally and in all circumstances, but you definitely do when you're talking about health. And it says, it's a simple rule that a debilitated planet destroys the house. Again, you can't say that just in all cases, but by the way, he does have a debilitated moon in his fourth house. He had difficult relationships with his mother and all these other kinds of things, which we're not going to get into. But this language is very strong because of examples like this. When it says destroys it, you have to always keep that in mind because it's still a divine force, and you have to interpret this if you're giving someone a reading and a natal reading. But again, this is a debilitated moon in his fourth house. And one can just, by simple observation, look and see how much emotional maturity and control he has. How in control of his emotions and anger and frustration and paranoia he has just as a human being. Again, you can clearly see that with his debilitated moon with Ketu in his fourth house. Okay? That's just a character trait that can also benefit him at times. Absolutely. It absolutely does, and it can. But when you're looking at a health transit and you're looking at the fact that this is getting activated by Dasha because it's in Mars' sign, because it's in Scorpio. So Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, which started September, which started about a month ago, the last month. Jupiter, Saturn, Mars has now been activated for a month. I'm gonna come back to that in a second. Put a flag in that for a second, because this last month has been one of the worst months of his life. You can't really see it any other way. His whole family is coming out against him. His cousin, or not cousin, his niece, his sister, every person who worked with him has all been coming out against him. This last month has been vicious with all of this malefic energy. Okay? And so Mars is not only ruling this debilitated moon, Ketu in the fourth, but by nakshatra, Mars is also ruling Rahu's sun in the 10th because they're in Mrigashira nakshatra, and it's also ruling this retrograde Jupiter in the second house because it's in Chitra nakshatra. So Mars is the ruler of all of that. So it's not only this problem right now with the lungs and this Ketu going over his natal moon. By the way, in one of the videos when I was talking about the transit of Ketu for Biden or Trump, I said this is definitely going to favor Biden more, I think. By the way, Biden is also in danger because Biden has a Scorpio ascendant. And let's hope Biden doesn't get the COVID as well. Let's hope. But the thing about it is that Biden's dashas isn't there yet. I'll do a look at Biden later, but this Jupiter, Saturn, Mars is the ruler of Ketu moon in the 12th. In the 4th. And it's also the ruler of this Rahu sun in his 10th house. And one of the things that happened as soon as Jupiter, Saturn, Mars began is, again, now it seems like, now it seems like, 1,000 years ago, but Bob Woodward, when he came out with those excerpts from his book and those recordings, remember when that happened? Now it seems like 1,000 years ago, it was literally a month ago. that happened right as Jupiter, Saturn, Mars happened, and the transit, it was actually this, the moon was actually in Mrigashira Nakshatra when that happened. I looked at that day to see, because I wanted to see the effect of what the moon was going to mean on election night. This moon that's happening on like next Wednesday, I guess is when it is. This moon up here on the 7th. The next time the moon goes around and comes into Mrigashira is going to be election day. Okay? So I want you to understand what happened the last time that the moon went through here was the day that all those recordings of Trump knew back in February about COVID, and everybody was like, oh, this is absolutely disastrous. That happened just less than a month ago, but it was when the moon came around this point. Whoops, let me make this a little bit bigger again. The moon came around this point, and now the moon is here. You see where the moon is now? It's here. So this is where the moon is now today on the 2nd. And we just looked at Ketu is here, 2832. The moon is here. And his natal moon is 2805. You watch Ketu goes back exact. The next few days are very, very dangerous. So this next few days being very dangerous for his health, for sure, because of this Ketu over the moon transit. But also, again, remember, the last time the moon went through Taurus, especially on this day, when the moon was in Mrigashira, which is right on his sun and Rahu, the last time that happened last month was the day that all of those Bob Woodward recordings came out. And you hear him talking about, oh yeah, COVID's going to be awful. Look at the karma here. Look at the karma that we're talking about, because again, I don't want to, we have to understand something. This is heavy stuff. He's been mocking COVID the whole time. Mocking it, downplaying it, mocking Biden even at the debate for wearing masks, endlessly flaunting this, this illness. And now here, of course, the karma of it is really intense that he's getting it. He's in serious danger. And again, when we get here around, especially the 7th, like the 7th of October, we have a, we have a, this recurrence transit of the last time that the moon came around, and it's, it could be a very difficult day. These few days here, like for the next week or so, it could be very touch and go. So that's for sure for now, for the next couple of days. The other thing we absolutely have to look at is this transit of Mars through this Gandanta point. Again, here's where we are today. The moon is at 28. Mars is like less than 1 degree of Aries. So when you look up in the sky tonight, you'll see that the moon and Mars will be very close together, even though they're in different rashis, even though they're in different signs. But again, this is Gandanta. And right now, Mars is in the Aries part of the Gandanta. It's in Aries, even though it's quite weak. It's going to go, and that's his 9th house. But again, this is the 3rd, which is tomorrow. Then on Sunday, it crosses over the Gandanta and goes into Pisces. Now we got Mars in his 8th house. You got to understand something. These are death transits. I'm not saying he's going to die. I want to be very clear. But these are the kinds of things that you can see. Make no mistake, this is very serious. He's got the best medical attention in the world, and it's good. But Mars, this 3rd level dasha planet, and the ruler of all of these planets here, including his debilitated moon, his Rahu sun, Mars is passing through the Gandanta and going into his 8th house in the next few days. And look, these Gandanta points are the places where the energy is very unstable, very uncertain. And in the in the overall scheme of things, the Revati Ashwini Gandanta, which is what we have here, is one where the soul becomes liberated. It's like the liberated soul. Again, that can also be where not just that the soul becomes liberated, but we just kind of leave, where everything gets really confused and everything gets really, in sort of disarray. But we have this very dangerous, tenuous transition here, with Mars passing through this Gandanta point over the next few days as well. Of course, it's also retrograde, and this retrograde is becoming, it's like reversing things. It's making things confusing. So this is definitely a tricky time, no question about it. Just looking at these dashas, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, is certainly something that will show a certain amount of danger here. And especially, I would say, over the next, week or so. I see people keep saying that it keeps freezing up. Don't know what to say. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to keep looking at the comments. So I don't know what's going on. So there's a lot of people on this, so I'm just going to keep going. But anyway, this is very tricky stuff. And again, for someone to die, you need a lot of things to line up. You need things like 8th Lord, 8th house. You need to see that the planet's involved, that there's difficulties like debilitations and all that. And this chart has like so much of that going on. Literally, this third level planet Mars is ruling debilitated moon. It's ruling a debilitated planet in the 4th house of the body part that is affected. It's the lungs. And the reports before I started said that he can't breathe, that he was having a problem breathing and stuff like that. You can see Ketu is right on his debilitated moon in the 4th. And it's going to get worse the next few days as Ketu gets even closer to it. You can see it's exact on October the 9th. Ketu in the sky is 2805. In his chart is 2805, the moon. So again, that's between now and next week. This next week, this is serious stuff, man. Especially once Mars crosses over into his 8th house. Like, for example, I would say, especially over the weekend. This is on October 4th through October 9th. This is serious stuff. These are serious transits. And again, they're giving him a cocktail, an experimental cocktail. Again, they wouldn't have done what they already did if it wasn't serious. Trump agreed to be like flown to Walter Reed, yesterday, and the initial word was that he's going to ride it out in the White House and blah blah blah. About 12 hours later, it's let's go to Walter Reed, fly me there, and look at what that does. I mean, he looks weak. It looks panicked. Not God knows what it does to the election. There's nothing about that he wanted to do. He wanted to downplay it, but it's like, no, this is serious. And again, it's not just a normal regimen. It's this experimental treatment that's to try to boost his own natural immunity. Probably because he doesn't have a good immunity, his immune system. You could see he's overweight and all these other things, his diet. He probably doesn't have natural good immunity, and he already maybe started losing his breath and all kinds of stuff. They wouldn't have done that if it wasn't serious, that quick. And it is serious. So I wanted to show these transits and show this third level dasha here, Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and that this is serious stuff, particularly with Mars also crossing over the Gandanta point here. This is for real. And the Gandanta, again, I'm speaking to people as if they know astrology because, everything I do isn't beginning level, okay? But it's when it's the crossover point between Pisces and Aries, or Cancer and Leo, or Sagittarius and Scorpio. And so Mars is going back over this Gandanta point right now. He's moving from Pisces to Aries, and this is one of those points where it says that the knot loosens, where the knot unties. Because these other rashis, these other signs are all tied together by the nakshatra that's behind them. When we hit these points, these Gandanta points, it's like the knot loosens. So it's a very tenuous, untethered place. It's like being untethered. It's like being cast adrift. And it's also retrograde. And this is just not a good transit. This is not the kind of transit I like to see if someone is sick. This is not what I would want to see. I would want to look in the chart and see something like, okay, well, I can see it's just this transit, something that just happened. It's going to pass. It's not going to pass yet. He's got about a week at least of difficulty. Particularly, I'm not going to feel right until that Ketu moves past his moon. But even after that happens, then Ketu continues to go toward natal Ketu, and Rahu has already passed over his natal sun, so that's good as well. But again, this Ketu, even moving up to his natal Ketu, is going to be going for a while, 2741. That's going to be going until the 14th of October. So again, I think the next week is going to be really acute and really, potentially difficult. And then, but what's going to happen after that also is then the sun, his ruling planet, is going to be debilitated again as we get into October. Again, and one of the things about this COVID is that it's not just it's not just like the flu. It seems to attack weaknesses in your body, many of them, and you just have to figure he has several weaknesses in his body. That overweight, there's got to be strain on his heart. There's strain on his lungs, other vital organs and systems. You just look at him, his age, his weight, his condition, and this thing rips through people. It rips through healthy people. So again, this is absolutely serious. So I wanted to do this. Again, I don't know what's happening in the comments. I'm just kind of ignoring it. I mainly wanted to talk about this part of it because this is serious. And I looked at it yesterday quickly when I did the update because it was a very fascinating case study. And before I even, I just looked at it and said, man, he's in Jupiter-Saturn Dasha and Mars is about to go into his 8th house. That's really not so good. And Ketu is going over his moon. So I kind of looked at it, but then I went back again earlier today and I was like, oh man, see what happens. You always get some kind of difficulty and stress going on, but what I look for is to see, are all of the Dasha planets lining up for it? And are the Dasha planets showing illness? Are the transits showing illness? Is it showing illness getting worse? Is it showing it getting better? What is happening? And all of this is getting really worse for the next week, especially, and serious in the way that you look at. Every astrologer or student knows the 8th house is the house of death. It's the death house. And again, this is when the announcement came. The announcement came at this point yesterday. The moon going through his 8th house, Mars retrograde at the very edge of Aries in that Gandanta point. So this was when it happened. This is when the announcement came. And again, as I run this forward, in particular, the thing that gets more ominous looking to me is this Mars crossing over the Gandanta point and going into his 8th house. It's just not something that you also like to see. You'd like to see it moving out of that. You'd like to see, and so, this is a very dangerous time for him. And again, astrology is, really shows this stuff and whatnot. And I wanted to just do this quick update. I see a lot of questions. People have all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. I'm not answering them right now. I'll go back maybe and look at it later. But again, I don't every time I'm live doesn't mean I want to answer every question people have. This is enough to stay focused. And so I'm talking about this thing right now, and it's very urgent, especially for the next week or so. If nothing else, you can see why this serious, severe illness and health problem has come at this time. And you can also see why, by the way, I've said the whole time, even about the election and whatnot, again, he's been behind the entire time. And people are like, well, he can always make it up. He can always make it up. He can always make it up. Again, it's very fine to just kind of say things like that. But I'm looking at astrology. I'm not looking at what could happen. Yes, anything could happen. But I've been saying the whole time, I don't see where he's running the dashas where that's going to happen. How? He's been under so much duress. And this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. This is why I'm saying it. This is why I've said it astrologically the entire time, those of you who have seen my updates. Now, again, I didn't predict he was going to get sick like this, but this is the same context. This is the context of the person who's going to come back and make up 6 points in Pennsylvania and 4 points in Arizona. And, you know, these are the karmas that the person is getting. Just look at the karmas he's getting now. For the last couple months, it's just been vicious. Vicious. Everyone against him. His family, this, that. Now he contracts COVID, and it's severe. And again, in this context, people think, oh, he's going to come back and make up all these ground. I mean, maybe. And again, like I've said before, the way that he wins is often by outsmarting people who actually defeat him at times. Like those who impeach him and they don't remove him. Those who get more votes, but he still wins, quote. Those kinds of things could happen. And you see him trying to do that in the election. By defunding the post office, by coming out saying it's going to be a hoax, just totally trying to muck up the whole thing. That's what he's trying to do. Because I'm sure he also knows he doesn't have the votes. He looks at the same polling that I look at. And you can watch the video I did yesterday to look where I talked about that in great detail, 538.com, and I went and showed all of the polling that's been consistently against him for months. And I mean, he's, on a course to get historically trounced. Again, then we can always say, oh, the polling's always wrong. It's actually not this consistent either. So anyway, I don't want to get so much into the election and all of that, but I'm just bringing it up in this context of those who are wondering about election and stuff. This is the content. This is his karmas right now, where he's almost on the verge of death from a fatal illness. And people are like, oh, he's going to win the election. He's going to win. He's going to win. It's like, I'm looking at the karmas like this is not a good time for this man on any level. And I've been saying it for months. I've been saying it since last year, since he went into Jupiter Saturn, that this is going to be a really hard time. So again, very sad to see this kind of, this is a vicious illness, but this is a very serious thing. And I'll just leave it at that. And again, I see a lot of comments. I'm not sure. Hopefully they were fine. So people were saying it was freezing and stuff. It usually doesn't happen. So if it did, sorry. But I'm just rolling through it. But anyway, hope you all have a good weekend and that you learned something from